big welcome to Julian Watson, the principal analyst from Wholesale Telecoms at OMDIA. And I believe we have Julian on the line. Hi, Julian.
Hi, Dario. Hope you can hear me.
Perfectly well. So, Julian, thanks for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have OMDIA in our event, and it's a pleasure to get to know you as well, the principal analyst for Wholesale. So we couldn't have a better start of the day than setting up a bit of the agenda from your point of view on what's happening right now. So, Julian, I'm going to go in the background. I'll leave you to your presentations, and I'll just appear again just to see if there are questions and other things later on.
Okay, well, many thanks, Dario, for inviting me to chat about the outlook for wholesale at this event. Really looking forward to it. So just a little introduction of who I am. So my name's Julian Watson, and as Dario said, I'm an analyst focusing on wholesale telecoms at OMDIA. So I've been covering this space since the beginning of 2021, so pretty new to it. Before then, I spent a few years analysing IoT connectivity. So this is the ground I plan to cover today. So starting with trends we're seeing as shifting the wholesale telecoms industry forward, and finishing off with some thoughts on how wholesale telecoms providers can help address MNO requirements around roaming and IoT. So very quick explanation of who we are. So OMDIA is the research division within Informatech. So as Dario said, OMDIA is a combination of several legacy brands, including Ovum, Heavy Reading, and IHS Markit Technology. So in addition to providing research, Informatech works with service provider, vendor, and enterprise audiences across our media, events, and also training activity across a range of verticals that you can see here, from AI and IoT through automotive, service providers, which is where I sit, to government and manufacturing. So some of you may have been to some of our events last week, such as 5G World. So we've been covering the wholesale telecom space since about 1999. So later you'll see an extract from our global wholesale forecast, which we segment in different ways by region, country, and service group. So in addition to the forecast, we also provide topical research on ongoing trends and issues like anti-fraud, wholesale innovations, neutral infrastructure, and many more. We also assist clients in understanding their customer needs and developing their strategies through customized research. So let's start with the 5 trends we see as shifting the wholesale telecoms industry. So I think first, the range of companies that have wholesale needs is really expanding rapidly. So as well as the traditional customers like retail telecom service providers and MVNOs, wholesale consumption is becoming relevant for a much broader range of actors that need to integrate connectivity or communications into their own service offerings, or to interconnect their infrastructure with wide area networks. So on the second point, we also see the telecom supply side, the wholesale telecom supply side, as diversifying. So in the UK and other parts of Europe, we're seeing a real rush of new and planned entrants into the fiber to the premises space using wholesale business models, as well as expanding access to ultra-fast broadband in remote and rural areas primarily, but also some urban and suburban areas. They're also driving competition in adjacent areas like backhaul and Ethernet connectivity. At the same time, we're seeing private equity investors expanding their reach into areas like fiber routes, data center connectivity, and cellular towers, all areas from which traditional telcos are divesting to a greater or a lesser extent. I think the third trend we're seeing is really that the pandemic has really forced enterprises to think to react and to plan on their feet. So their need to move quickly and to provide better online and digital experiences for their customers is driving new requirements of their own suppliers and in turn upstream to the wholesale telecoms industry. I think based on surveys we've run, security, mobility, and services like SD-WAN are very high up on the enterprise wish list. So this does create a new opportunities for wholesale telecoms providers. But I think one of the challenges they face is designing wholesale services, for instance, like a white label SD-WAN that complement rather than compete with their customers' own offerings. So point 4 here. So I think satellite connectivity has historically perceived to be somewhat expensive to build and buy, slow in performance, and in general, peripheral to the needs of service providers and enterprise customers. I think this is changing somewhat with the improved economics around MEO and in particular LEO, low Earth orbit constellations, and the entry of really well-funded players into the satellite sector, notably Elon Musk's Starlink. So satellite solutions are actually gaining traction in the real world. This is more than hype. So in recent days, Starlink has secured a mobile backhaul deal from Japan's KDDI to connect cell towers in rural areas. Similarly, OneWeb, one of Starlink's competitors, has struck a deal with AT&T to connect business customers and cell towers in remote parts of the US. On the enabling technology front, we're seeing artificial intelligence and machine learning techniques gradually being integrated into fraud management systems to improve the ability of telcos to detect and block bad traffic. So last but not least, I think both formal and informal collaboration is accelerating across the wholesale telecoms industry and with retail partners. So some of this has been in response to the changing capacity and performance requirements at the early stages of the pandemic. But longer term efforts by organisations such as the Metro Ethernet Forum, another MEF, are also bearing fruit. So just recently, the Metro Ethernet Forum announced that, I think this was just last week, announced that over 20 major service providers, among which AT&T, Verizon, Orange, many more, are either in production or planning to go into production with lifecycle service orchestration, so-called LSO Sonata APIs. What do these do? Well, in essence, these APIs will enable buyers and sellers of services like carrier Ethernet and internet access to move from manual to automated processes for functions like quoting, ordering, and billing. And all of this is set to greatly speed up service provisioning. So turning to the impacts of COVID-19 on the wholesale market. So I think overall, active traffic management and accelerated planned upgrades did enable network providers to cope with very much changed backbone traffic patterns. Though we think at OMDIA there'll be a gradual shift towards office-based or hybrid working, backbone traffic patterns won't revert to pre-pandemic patterns, what we saw pre-pandemic, because COVID-19 appears to have accelerated some pre-existing trends. So not least the shift of enterprise applications and workloads to the cloud, but also the adoption of online entertainment among consumers. And there has certainly been an uptick in IoT adoption among not only large enterprises, but SMEs since the onset of the pandemic. I think on a somewhat less positive note, COVID-19 has been fertile ground for criminals seeking to exploit the work from home environment and uncertainty in many countries around access to vaccines and treatment for COVID-19. So traditional forms of telecoms fraud, such as international revenue share fraud, which I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about in the next couple of days, as well as financial fraud that uses voice and SMS channels. All of this remains a big challenge for the industry going forward. So I think this is a slide that we put together in about May 2020 or so on how we thought wholesale providers should or would act and plan for the pandemic and beyond. So largely speaking, I think this scenario, this picture that we painted has planned out, with providers initially focused on quickly adding capacity and then homing in on opportunities to streamline or automate processes and generally introduce more flexibility into how customers can access services. So more long-term projects from 2021 onwards, like the migration to open optical networks, are on the longer-term roadmap. So here are some of the silver linings from the last couple of years. It's been a challenging last couple of years, but there are some positives to be taken. I think the one takeaway of these five I would emphasize here is the longer term risk around security and the need for security to be baked into new services at the very outset, so not added at a later stage or retrofitted. Surveys that OMDIA has taken in the last year or so suggest that security is one of the biggest skills gap among wholesale customers such as resellers and channel partners, and one of the biggest skills gap among their customers, among their enterprise customers. Therefore, I think wholesale telecoms providers have a really important role to play in helping their customers build and sell security services that address not only threats like DDoS and hacking, but also mobile-centric risks like fraud and grey routes. So looking ahead, this is our global wholesale forecast. So as you can see, it spans 6 market segments. This was completed in about August 2020. So I think if I were to refresh these forecasts today, I'd probably slightly reduce the decline in international and national voice for 2020, because there was a spike in consumption, certainly in the early months of the pandemic. But the long-term trend for national and international voice from 2021 onwards is one of continuing erosion. However, this erosion is more than offset by growth in national last mile and national and international backbone services. Here, there are quite a few drivers at play, not least really robust demand for Ethernet and other connectivity technologies to connect distributed branch environments, and certainly demand for cloud and data center connectivity is another major trend. I think innovation is going to be really important in driving the market forward and helping competitors differentiate their service offerings. So we've been doing an annual rating and ranking of innovations since about 2011. So the bulk of the 180 shortlisted innovations since then have been new services or enhancements to existing services rather than new go-to-markets or business models. You can see in the chart on the right there. As you can see in the last couple of years, if you just take a look at the pie chart of wholesale innovations by type 2019-2020, fraud and security has been a hot topic, with shortlist innovations from the likes of BICS and Post Cyberforce, which built a a product or a solution that improved signaling protection in roaming environments. And we also saw new anti-fraud capabilities from iBasis and Telefonica Global Solutions. Over the last couple of years, I think over half of our shortlisted wholesale innovations, about 13 of 23 or so, I think, have involved some type of partnership or collaboration between two or more players. So there are several flavors of partnership. So partnerships between wholesale service providers and hyperscalers on the build out of new subsea capacity. We've also seen collaboration between network equipment vendors and wholesale service providers, really to accelerate the commercialization or the bringing to market of automated services like bandwidth on demand. We've also seen service providers and specialists in areas like security and analytics partner more closely to bring new capabilities to market. So just taking a little drink here. I think overall, the proven ability to reduce complexity or cost for service providers is a key factor in our ratings and our rankings. So in 2020, Enet, which is a leading wholesale provider in Ireland, topped the table of our rankings with its Cloud Connect product. So I think it came top really because it combined very expansive availability of dedicated Ethernet connectivity across business premises in Ireland with direct connectivity to over 120 cloud service providers. So it was built up front with a really rich ecosystem. I think lastly, I'd like to talk a little bit about how wholesale telecoms providers can help MNOs with their requirements around roaming and IoT. And I think we'll probably hear a lot more of these topics in the next couple of days. So what are those challenges? Well, I think even before the pandemic, many MNOs weren't monetizing consumer roaming effectively. I mean, particularly among so-called silent roamers and the more conscious prepaid customers. I think second, roaming IoT devices, roaming cellular IoT devices that breach contractual time limits on roaming have really too often fallen under the radar of host MNOs. So they haven't been able to monetize roaming IoT connectivity effectively. I think clearly travel restrictions have taken a really big toll on MNOs' retail and wholesale roaming revenue streams. I think to cite a couple of examples, in France, I think roaming revenues fell by about 13% in 2020, and there was an even bigger decline in Spain by about 40% in terms of wholesale roaming revenues. I think a return to business travel and tourism will help to reverse the declining roaming revenues. But MNOs really need to take steps to better monetize both of these areas, so both consumer roaming and IoT roaming. I think wholesale providers have really many assets to bring to the table to help MNOs with these challenges. They have large-scale IPX signaling infrastructure, have insight into traffic patterns across international markets, and they have experience working and negotiating with a wide range of MNO partners. I think this puts them in a really good opportunity and a really good space to help the rather slower moving MNOs to better monetize both their roaming operations, their consumer roaming operations, and their IoT roaming operations more effectively. So looking ahead towards 5G standalone, I think we're in a non-standalone world primarily at the moment, but we are shifting to standalone networks. There are many areas where wholesale telecoms providers can help MNOs with the migration to 5G standalone, such as in the move towards voice over LTE, which is still, not ubiquitous across international markets, but is a must-have for the move towards 5G standalone. And also they can help MNOs with reaching those really difficult end-to-end quality of services levels for future IoT applications like smart grid, like remote medical diagnostics and automotive VTX. So if you could take a look at the charts on the right of the slide, I just want to frame the cellular IoT connectivity opportunity. So OMDIA's IoT team's latest forecast point to healthy growth in cellular IoT connections and revenue over the next few years. So total connections, I think, will exceed around 3 billion, and annual revenue will get to around $10 billion in 2027. I think during this time frame, 5G will begin to support some higher end cellular IoT use cases. But the ARPU across all use cases, across the many use cases, from metering to remote monitoring and asset tracking, as well as the higher sort of use cases around automotive and transportation and medical. So as a whole, the ARPU across all use cases will be about $4 per year, and that's around a third of a dollar per month. So these numbers are somewhat skewed by the heavy impact of Japan within the whole cellular IoT market. However, I think they do underscore the incredibly tight economics around IoT connectivity. So this means that wholesale providers helping MNOs with areas like, fraud prevention and security for IoT devices will really need to flex their pricing models to suit different types of IoT applications. So just to wrap up, so I think the trends we're seeing in the enterprise market, such as demand for guaranteed access to cloud applications, quicker fixes after downtime, and better digital tools and better digital online experiences will continue to drive new requirements of the wholesale telecoms industry. But I think a one-size-fits-all approach won't work. So one of the most common questions we're asked is how wholesale service providers can best segment their addressable market and what programs and what tools they need to put in place to support different customer segments. So I think that pretty much wraps up my presentation for today. Many thanks for listening. Always happy to chat about the trends we're seeing in the market. And do contact me via email or via LinkedIn. Many thanks, and back to you, Dario.
Well, thank you, Julian, and we don't want to let you go so fast yet. We still have a few more minutes with the questions from me, but also lots of questions from the audience as well. If you're okay, I'll start.
Yes.
Well, actually, interesting questions, and it goes back to the theme of transformation, etc. I don't see who asked it, but it says security. How much revenue can be foreseen in this area? We're talking about wholesale getting a new layer, not just the transport side. It's getting a bit more of variety into the differentiation and the services themselves. So, question to you: how do you see security, and how much money is there?
How much money there? Well, I think we have a team focused on cybersecurity that have very detailed numbers on the size of the opportunity. So frankly, I don't know the actual numbers off the top of my head. Obviously, cybersecurity spans many different areas. From protection of IoT devices, from protection of networks. Both in the wide area network and the local area network. So we see as security being really important from, from the device through to the network into the cloud. I think in the context of wholesale, I think we're seeing different trends, come through. One, we're seeing the integration of security into standard voice and capacity products. So security is not separable from the basic services, the basic voice, the basic capacity services that you're offering. If you don't do security, then you're not going to be able to compete effectively in the market. The other trend we are seeing is maybe move towards more premium products, more premium voice products, more premium capacity products with enhanced security baked in. So, for instance, we're seeing enhanced DDoS products being baked into long haul services. We're seeing new services such as data center mirroring being launched by wholesale providers. So really, in all, there is a big opportunity for the entire industry, including wholesale providers. And I think one of the particular reasons for that big opportunity, as I said in my presentation, was that there's a real skill gap around security among both the retail service providers, some of the channel partners that wholesale providers work with, some of the resellers. So wholesale providers can step in and help to train them. There was also a big security skills gap among enterprises. So I think security is going to be a greenfield opportunity.
Oh, great. And I'm sure a lot of our members would agree with the view that the security is becoming so much more prominent in the wholesale industry. But then I have a question from you. I just want to check your numbers, because you reported a 200 billion wholesale market right now, roughly.
Yeah.
And that goes to 260 billion by the end of your forecast, or roughly about that, which is in 5 years' time. I feel a bit guilty having started the event saying, well, we need to look at wholesale. This is, the toughest transformation, etc. This seems to be a healthy number and healthy growth. What do you think is going to be the secret of this continuous growth in wholesale?
Yeah, I mean, there are certainly, Dario, there are certainly some risks to these forecasts, which I can talk about a little bit more. But I think there are, as I said during my presentation, there are a few trends that are really driving this. You are seeing more players enter the market. So, for instance, within the broadband access segment, which is not only going to be relevant for consumers and businesses for broadband access, but is going to be part of the the SD-WAN play as well. Increasingly, the public internet access. We're seeing new players enter this space very quickly, primarily private equity backed. So we think that wholesale provision is going to play a bigger part in servicing end user requirements, as well as introducing services like broadband access. I think there is going to be certainly a shift towards other services like Ethernet and backhaul going wholesale. And we're already seeing, as I said, a rush of private equity investors move into the provision of wholesale services to address service provider requirements. I think as we're seeing the shift towards 5G, it's just not realistic for mobile network operators with their sort of constrained capex and opex budgets to build out 5G networks on their own, whether it be the radio access networks or the backhaul networks or the transport networks. They will need partners. They will need more sources of capital. And in adjacent areas such as in broadband access, in fiber to the premises access, we're seeing incumbents such as Telefonica and KPN and many others increasingly use wholesale business models in partnership with private equity. But from the enterprise side, from the end user side, what is driving a lot of this positive momentum? Well, I think there are a few drivers here. There's one, the shift towards the migration of enterprise applications and workloads to the cloud. No, we are still at a really early stage in this, and there's a lot more potential for enterprises to move this way. The second trend I would see is the demand for enhanced connectivity to distributed branch environments among enterprises. I think wholesale telecoms providers are going to play a really important role in providing the underlay for SD-WAN. And then the third trend is really the explosion of consumer entertainment services through the medium of the internet. I think we're not only talking about the Netflixes and the online gaming that is going to drive capacity requirements. We're also talking about probably a range of new applications that we haven't even thought of today. So I think there are I think the outlook is positive. There are some potential risks to this. I think our forecasts bake in a maximum addressable market for IP transit, for instance. That could be slightly trimmed by increased peering in the longer term forecast. And of course there are quite possibly economic shocks to come.
Well, thank you very much, Julian. Fantastic talking to you. And by the way, we haven't covered all the questions. Just to let you know, other questions were about ATP market. How big was that in your forecast, as well as automation and more. But stay with us. Talk to us on the chat if you want. Unfortunately, time has run out. But from my side and everybody, it's a big thank you for your presentation, Julian, and for setting a good tone for the beginning of this day. Now we can start with an agenda that looks at connectivity, new products, as you say, new application, more demand, but some challenges, as you were also referring to at the beginning of your presentation. So thank you very much, and I hope we'll see you soon again somehow here, Beth. Thank you, Julian.
Many thanks, Dario.